Okay, we are going to do a quick demo of the end-to-end regression testing capabilities of Mesh Dynamics. In the previous meeting, we did a demo of the service testing capabilities, mostly from an engineer's perspective, following the workflow of an engineer who's developing the services. This is typically done more by the QA team and focusing on the end-to-end tests. So what we will do for the demo is we will record some interactions with our demo app. Obviously, you can create those API requests manually as well using the desktop tool that we showed. Here, for efficiency, we are just going to interact with the UI and create all the API requests. Then we are going to do what we call context propagation, which is quite often there are dependencies of subsequent requests on prior requests. So for example, a typical application is authorization. If you need to use an auth token for certain requests, you will need to propagate the auth token that was generated during a login request. Then we will do what we call the assertion rule generation, and that's essentially from trying to determine automatically which are the items that should be matched, which are the items that do not need to be matched. If we have extra rules, we'll try to remove those. And here, for the sake of baselining for the demo, I have actually cleared out all rules. So we are essentially starting from a clean slate. So the first thing we will do is we will put our app into record mode and interact with the app and capture a bunch of API requests. So let's go into that. I'm going to go. So I've already selected the instance from which I want to record. So I'm going to say record. Let's give it a name. Palo Alto Networks record -1. So I'm going to start the recording. So I've put our actual app in record mode. I'm going to now go interact with our demo app. So this is our demo app. The first thing I'm going to do is log in, and just keep in mind that all subsequent requests need to use the auth token that will be generated with this login. And here we are actually using bearer tokens, not using basic auth. Okay, so this is our demo application, which is like an online library. Here are all the items in the library. Each item's got a bunch of information associated with it. It's also got category informations. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to first create some custom categories using the existing categories. So here, by default, so if we look at the category group, I'm going to create a custom category. Let's give it a name. Let's give it a pan cat 1. And there are pre-existing category names that are associated with each item in the library. I'm going to create a custom category by combining a few of these. So let's say my custom category consists of these 3 predefined categories. I'm going to say, okay, that's my custom category. So that's done. Now, if I look here, I'm going to see this custom category. Now, if I go here by default, it's listing every single item in the library. If I say only show me items from my custom category, it's going to show me just the items in the category. Now, we already went through the steps of creating a custom category, as well as listing the items in that custom created category. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to list the details of an item. So let's just click on it. I've just listed the details of this item. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rent this item. So let's say I'm going to rent this item for 4 days. Rent. Done. Before I log out, I'm going to delete the custom category that I created. I don't need to, but if I don't delete that custom category, then I'll have to do one of 2 things. Either I'll have to reset the database to a known state every time I run the test, or I'll have to add a manual request somewhere in the automation that deletes the category that I created. Instead, I'm just going to delete the category right from here, and that'll be actually part of the test. So I'm going to say delete this custom category that I created. Done. So I'm going to close it. The last thing I'm going to do is log out. Okay, so those are the interactions I wanted to do, and now I'm going to stop the recording. So if we just go with that, the user flows that we exercised there, I logged into the application, I created a custom category, I listed all the items that are there that belong to that custom category. I listed the details of that one item in that category. I rented an item. And finally, I deleted the custom category that I created and I logged out. So those are the things I did. Now let's look at what kind of information we captured this. I'm going to close this. And you have already seen this, but I'll just quickly show you. So I'll just pick this test suite that I created, pan record one, select this one. And you can see all the various services that were exercised, all of the different APIs that were exercised, all the different traces that we created, etc. Okay, now if you remember, you can just click on some of these and you can look at the details of this API requests here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, now if I run the test with what I just recorded, the test will fail. The reason it will fail is, so if you, when we run the test, the first thing it's going to do is going to run a request with the login request, so that it'll issue a new token. But everything else that I recorded, it has the token that was issued when I captured it. And if I run the request with those tokens, that's going to fail. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch the I'm going to switch to the other cluster, the replay cluster, and I'm going to run a test using that file. And I expect all the requests to fail because the request will be made with the old token, which should not be honored anymore. So let's go ahead and try that. So I've started running the, oh, yeah, it's fine. I've started running the test. It's going to go through the request. Now, while it's running, and then if you remember, we have that 15-second delay. While it's running the request, let me explain the setup here. So I'm going to close this window while it's running. I'm going to go here, take a look at this diagram. Now, there are a bunch of services here, and during the replay, we actually specify the configuration. So here, for this configuration, if you look at this, this is a selected configuration. Actually, I should have run it with everything mocked. But anyway, going forward, we'll do that. Here, we are mocking two of the services. The other two services are live. Reviews and ratings are being mocked. The others are live. Let me just switch over here for the subsequent requests. Okay, so let me see if it's finished. If it's finished, let's look at what the results look like. Okay, the test has finished, and as you can see, pretty much everything's red. So let's look at movie info, which was mostly the service we wanted to focus on. So everything's red. If we look at the details, what I expect to see is every single request got an unauthorized error because we issue the request with that old cookie, which is no longer honored. So if I click here, you can see every request is unauthorized. I'll take a look at another random API. Everything's unauthorized. So it's behaving exactly as I would expect it to. Now, you have two choices. One is you can, of course, go and manually plug in the right cookies. But what we do is we have this little setup where we will actually go through the sequence of requests and try to identify all of these relationships. Whereas you have a initial request, and then some of the information that's generated as part of that request is used in a subsequent request. So we will go ahead and try to generate those rules automatically. Now, just for your information, I cleared out all of those rules before we started running this demo so that we are starting from a clean slate. So the first thing is we are going to focus on what we call the context propagation rules, which is situations like a subsequent request depends on what was generated in a previous request. The classic example is login. You generated new token, all subsequent requests will use that token, and that needs to be propagated. So we will try to do that automatically here by learning those relationships and deriving those rules. So I'm going to select the collection, which is obviously the test that we just created, select the service, which is movie info, and then I'm going to say run. When I say run, it processes the data, learns the rule, and downloads this CSV file. So let's look at that CSV file. Let's make it full screen. And let me expand the rows a little bit so that I can explain what's going on here a little bit better. Okay. So what this is telling us, really the key things to note here without going into too much detail is saying, okay, here's the source of a certain information. So as you can see, it's this bearer token, which was generated by the login info. We think that's getting used by this movie, essentially every single API, right? If you see every single API saying we think this API is using this token that was generated by this login request. And it said the original request was a post, and then the subsequent requests, they are a mix of get, post, delete, etc. And obviously, I know that all of these things are actually correct, so we need to leave them in. If you look at the next one, what's going on here is it's saying there's this category genre ID where there was a post request. It generated something with this 138 that was also used by some subsequent requests. So essentially what this is detecting is I created that custom category. This was a category ID that was associated with that custom category that I created, and that's being issued by a couple of subsequent requests. One of them is a get movie list. One of them is the delete genre group. So that also looks correct. So let's just focus on those. And then if you can see, the rest are actually lower confidence. I'm not entirely sure what they are. So I'm going to just delete them and just let's focus on those two. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to save this file back. So save that. I think I did. It's interesting. Excel doesn't give any indication that it's saved. Okay, then I'm going to load that rule set back up here. So I'm going to say upload rules, choose file. Oh, choose file, that's this one, the learn context propagation rules that I just created. And I'm going to say upload. So successfully uploaded. So I assume that at this point the system has automatically learned the rules required to propagate the login token, as well as the information required to propagate the category ID of that category that I created. So let's go ahead and run the test again, and let's see if the outcome changes. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing, replay auth, set the same file, and I'm going to run the test again. So this is running now. It's going to take a little bit of time to run. Okay, about halfway through the test requests. And if you can see here, it's saying it's 10 out of 18. So that means there are 18 requests that were issued to the movie info service. And we have the entire trace for each of them, which we will look at when we are looking at comparing the outcome of the results in more detail. Okay, so this is done. Now let's look at the results. Okay, I would expect at least some of the requests to have turned green. And as you can see, that's exactly what has happened. Some of these requests have turned green. So like the categories information is actually getting the right category. So it's no longer getting the unauthorized. It's actually executing because the login information is correct. It's also getting the right category information that we left in there. And that's why you can see it saying the genre group is deleted. If I look at one of the other ones, get genre list movies, it's actually pulling out the right set of movies using that genre group category that we created. So both is the login token, the auth token is being propagated correctly, as well as the genre group is working correctly. But we still have a lot of things that are red, right? And why is that? And if we look at it, you will notice we are essentially looking at the outcome. Let's look at some of these. Let's look at the list movies, because those are the interesting requests. So if you look at it, it's saying, okay, here's this rating that was not there. Is that a problem or is that good? But now let's look at something. Okay, here's another one. Here, the timestamp is obviously different for every run. By the way, the left-hand side is the recording, the right-hand side is the new run. timestamp is different every time and it's saying timestamp's different, that's a problem. There could be other kind here. There are other differences like this. What has happened here? Okay, so this array, the names are out of order because we randomize we really don't care about the uh, order in which the names appear, and we are saying our array is expected to be an ordered list of items. So that's a problem. So now what we will go is we have replayed this. Now we will try to learn this kind of rules. Now let's say that this replay, whether it's good or we expect the replay to be run exactly against the same setup with the same data. So we expect that the results should be the same. And what we are looking for is we are looking for any deviations and we are flagging them as, okay, we expect these things are okay. These things do not necessarily need to match from run to run. So let's go ahead and run that rule set and generate that rule set by running the what we call comparison rules, basically equivalent of assertion. So I'm going to go, this is the test and record one. I'm going to select the second test run output. I'm going to select that and obviously I'll say learn. And what it's doing is it's, once again, it's just learn. It's comparing the results of the two outputs, the two test results, and trying to determine a whole bunch of rules by itself. So let's look at what kind of information it has learned from this. Okay, so as you can see, it's generated about, oh, a bunch of rules, about 100 rules. Let's look at some of these. So first, the categories. So this, as you can see, this first 16, they say create. So these are the rules it's recommending that we create. Then it says none. So these are essentially things which it thinks, okay, these are the behaviors that we are noticing and you don't need to do anything about it. This can also be a third set that's called delete, where we are recommending you should remove these rules. Now, since we wiped everything clean, obviously there are no pre-existing rules, so there are no delete recommendations here. Now, let's look at a couple of these details and just see if this makes sense. Okay, so here what it's saying is, it's saying that the genre group post request got something, and if we are expecting uh, that the response should be equal, and it's saying it's right now the default rule is everything's required, and it's saying ignore. The reason it's recommending this is obviously the particularly I think I forgot to mock that service. So every time we send that request, it generates a new random ID, and the IDs didn't match. Since we expected the outcome to be exactly the same, it's saying don't flag this as an error, just flag this as the rule to ignore that mismatch. And I think that recommendation is correct. Similarly, it seems looks like something similar. So here are a bunch of recommendations here. I'm not going to go through them individually. Let's see if there's one other. Let's see if there's a login related information, because that's probably going to be interesting. Um, in the create git, here. So this is actually something I want to highlight. So here you can see there's the login request. And obviously the second time we ran the login, it created a different token, right? And it's saying the body token, they're different, and we recommend that you ignore that difference. Obviously, we do want to set that rule because we know every time we issue the login, the token is going to be different. So we are going to say this, you can see this rule is intuitively correct. Similarly, another one we can do is this, this one's the genre group ID, right? We know every time we create that genre ID, it's going to assign a new randomly generated ID, and it's saying ignore that because it doesn't match the previously created. Once again, that's probably a correct that's probably a correct conclusion to draw, and we are going to say, yep, ignore that. So essentially what we are doing is we are taking these two outputs of two runs which are expected to be identical. We are comparing them, and since we expect them to be identical, we are saying anything that's different, we can say let's create rules to ignore those so we don't have any false failures. So what I'm going to do here is, without going through all these details, I don't think I changed anything, so I'll say don't save. I'm going to just load this rule set back up. Oh, by the way, when we generate the rule set, we don't actually apply those by default. We always require a manual, one run of manual supervision before we apply them. Also, these rule sets that we apply, they stay in place. So the next time we generate the rule set, it'll only show you the new rules that you created that it requires will be on top of the rules that are already existing. So here I'm going to just say choose this rule set, the learn comparison rules, that's the assertion rules, and upload that. Okay, so I'm done uploading that. Now let's go back and run the test one more time. So now it's going to use both the context propagation that we did as well as the new comparison rule set that we did. So I'm just going to say run. Going to take the same amount of time to run. And hopefully, if I did everything right, then it should be using the new comparison rule set, and we should see fewer errors. In particular, I would expect a lot more of the APIs in that service to turn green. So let's see what happens. Although not all of them may turn green because there might be other issues that we didn't detect or fix. Yeah, this takes a little bit of time. It's run plus the 15 seconds definitely can seem like a pretty long time. Okay, now it's done. Let's look at the results of this run now. Okay, as you can see, even more things have turned green. So login is pretty much everything is green except list movies and genre groups. Let's look at one of those. Let's look at list movies and see why it's not completely green. Okay, so as you can see here, timestamp, this has now turned green, even though it's different because we automatically generated that rule and said ignore. All right, here, this is one randomization that we did not catch because it didn't happen there. If I run it another time, if we get this behavior, we might catch it or we may not. Here, what I can do is I can also go in and here set some rules manually. So if you notice this ratings, this block, we randomize both the appearance of that. It does not appear there every time. The other thing is we do randomize the color that we put in. So here I can go in and manually set a rule and say, ignore this difference because we are essentially randomizing that. So I'm going to say comparison, just ignore the value. So if I run it again, this will not flag an error. And it'll essentially apply to all of the occurrences. Actually, that's the only difference. So that random thing that we didn't catch because it didn't happen in that one run, that's the only difference. And I can now manually set this rule. Let's look at the other API that did not turn green. So let's look at the other one. The other API was a genre group. Let's see what happened there. Ah, here actually, okay, looks like we have some other errors in that for whatever reason something did not respond and that created an error, something came out empty. So this one actually does need looking into. We do need to look into this and see what's the problem because this thing did not appear. But here, as you can see, because I'm not mocking that, the genre group, even though the genre group is different, we learned from the previous run that in this setup we are actually issuing a different ID every time. So it's different every time, so we are actually marking this as green. So we have actually picked out everything that should have been automatically marked as ignore. And the two issues that this replay picked up, they're actually genuine problems that we should go and fix. One of them, of course, is just setting the rule set that's coming from the randomization. And I set that manually, so I would need to save again. And this one looks like there is actually genuinely something wrong with our demo that we do need to go and fix. So that's essentially the end-to-end regression testing product. So just to summarize, in this particular example, we just captured all the API requests based on user flows just by capturing the requests. You can either do that, and everything is done end to end. You can either do that, or you can create those requests from in the API Studio, like we showed you. When it comes to the understanding of one thing that I did not show you is the details of how to diagnose the issues. Actually, let's go a little bit into that. Since we have a listeners, we actually, for all of these requests, we actually get the entire trace of these requests. So if I look at the trace, this is going to show you, okay, movie info was the service where we made the initial request. That was the list movies. Movie info called reviews. And this is the capture, as you can see, this is the recorded part. We will look at the replay in a bit. So movie info called reviews, reviews called ratings, then movie info called restaurant called ratings details. And here it's showing you where the difference happened when we did the replay. Now let's look at the replay quickly. It's essentially the same thing. For whatever reason, we actually made two requests, two ratings, maybe one timed out. But here you can see which request failed, which request had a different behavior. So we can actually click in here and see what changed. So I suspect it doesn't look like it was the response. It was probably in the request headers or in the request. Yeah. Okay. So this is I forgot. I should have actually pointed this out. As you can imagine, when we issue a let me see. I'm actually not entirely sure why this is getting marked as an error. So I think we can. I do need to look into this. I'm not entirely sure why this is getting marked as an error. Don't think it's in the request parameters. But anyway, you can see this shows you the parameters look fine. So it shows you the entire trace. You can dig into any of these traces and you can see what happens there. If there's a problem there, you can just identify it from there. Although you will have to be better than me at identifying the problems, but you do have all of that information. You're not just looking at that, trying to debug the problem by looking at that end request, what went wrong there, and trying your best to reproduce all of that information here. The entire trace of that uh, execution is there. You can go through step by step and see what changed, where the problem originated, and you can trace it very, very quickly, very effectively. We also have the ability to go file bugs against any of these issues. So if there's a bug here, for example, over here, if there's a bug, I can go ahead and file a bug from the diff view. We can go ahead and file a bug against any of this. So here, obviously, this is not a bug, but if I wanted, I can go ahead and file a bug again in Jira. We have a Jira integration here. We can go change the assertions as we already showed you. So that's a quick overview of our end-to-end test capabilities. I know this is really not the easiest thing to follow in a recorded demo. Would have loved to have done it in person, but at least if you have any questions, do let us know. Happy to take calls or try to answer via emails. I think if you have questions, it's probably best to explain them in a face-to-face meeting. But this should give you an idea of what the end-to-end capabilities are. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording.